The Montana sky bled crimson as the pickup truck rattled to a stop, kicking up dust that stung my eyes. I was 25, broke, and running from a life that had chewed me up and spit me out. This ranch, sprawling, wild, and reeking of earth and freedom, was my last shot at starting over. I stepped out, boots crunching on gravel, my duffel bag slung over one shoulder. The air was sharp, carrying the scent of pine and hay. A man stood on the porch of the main house, his silhouette tall and unyielding against the fading light. Caleb Dawson, the foreman, was everything the job listing promised: weathered, stoic, and commanding, with a Stetson tilted low over eyes that seemed to see right through me. "You Jamie Carter?" he asked, voice low, like the rumble of distant thunder. I nodded, swallowing the knot in my throat. "Yes, sir. Here for the ranch hand job." He studied me, his gaze lingering too long, like he was searching for something I wasn't ready to show. "You ever worked a ranch before?" His tone wasn't cruel, but it carried an edge, like he already knew the answer. "No, sir," I admitted, shifting my weight. "But I'm a fast learner, and I need this." Caleb's lips twitched, not quite a smile. "We'll see." He turned, gesturing for me to follow. "Bunkhouse is this way. Don't expect coddling." The ranch was a world unto itself, nestled in the shadow of the Rockies. Acres of rolling pasture stretched out, dotted with cattle and framed by jagged peaks. The bunkhouse was a weathered wooden structure, smelling of leather and sweat, where I'd share space with a half-dozen other hands. They were a rough bunch, men with calloused hands and stories etched into their faces. I felt like an outsider from the start, my city-bred softness a glaring flaw. That first night, I lay awake on a creaking cot, the weight of my past pressing down. I'd left Chicago after my family turned their backs on me. My father's voice still echoed. No son of mine. I'd come out to them a year ago, and the fallout had been brutal. Disowned, jobless, and alone, I'd answered the ranch ad on a whim, desperate for escape. But lying there, listening to the snores of strangers, I wondered if I'd traded one hell for another. The next morning, Caleb put me to work mending fences. The labor was grueling, hauling posts, driving stakes, battling the wind that howled across the plains. My hands blistered, my muscles screamed, but I kept my head down. Caleb was everywhere, barking orders, his presence a constant pressure. Yet there was something else in the way he watched me. Not just judgment, but curiosity, like he was testing me for more than my work ethic. By the third day, I was bone-tired but starting to find a rhythm. The other hands warmed to me, especially Maria, a tough-talking woman who ran the kitchen and treated me like a little brother. "You're not half bad, city boy," she teased, tossing me an apple during a break. I grinned, grateful for the small kindness. But Caleb remained a mystery. He was fair but distant, his words clipped, his eyes always searching. One evening, as I was stacking hay bales in the barn, he appeared in the doorway, his shadow stretching long across the floor. "You're holding up," he said, almost grudgingly. "Didn't think you would." I wiped sweat from my brow, meeting his gaze. "Told you I'm a fast learner." He stepped closer, the air between us charged. "Why'd you come here, Jamie?" "Really?" The question caught me off guard. I could have lied, spun some story about wanting adventure. But something in his voice, raw, almost vulnerable, made me pause. "I needed to start over," I said quietly. "Chicago, it wasn't home anymore." He nodded, like he understood more than I'd said. "This place has a way of breaking you before it builds you back up." Then he turned and walked away, leaving me with a strange ache in my chest. Days turned into weeks, and I settled into the ranch's rhythm. I learned to ride, to rope, to read the land like a book. But Caleb's presence never stopped unsettling me. There was a tension between us, unspoken but electric, like a storm brewing on the horizon. I caught myself watching him, how his hands moved with quiet strength, how his rare smiles softened the hard lines of his face. I told myself it was nothing, that I was projecting my own loneliness onto him. But late at night, when the bunkhouse was quiet, I couldn't shake the feeling that he was watching me too. One evening, after a long day herding cattle, I found myself alone by the creek that ran through the property. The water was cold, glinting under the moonlight. I was splashing my face when I heard boots on the gravel behind me. Caleb. He stood there, hat in hand, his expression unreadable. "You're not like the others," he said, his voice softer than I'd ever heard it. "You've got something to prove." I bristled, unsure if it was a compliment or a challenge. "Maybe I do. What's it to you?" He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the leather and smoke on him. "I've been where you are," he said, his eyes locking onto mine. "Running. Hiding." My breath caught. "What do you mean?" He didn't answer right away. Instead, he reached out, his hand hovering near my shoulder, like he wanted to touch me but didn't dare. "Meet me at the old barn tomorrow night," he said finally. "There's something I need to show you." His words sent a chill through me, not just from the mystery, but from the weight behind them. I nodded, unable to speak, and watched him walk away into the dark. As I stood there, the creek whispering beside me, I realized I was terrified, not of Caleb, but of what his offer might mean. For the first time in a long time, I felt something dangerous stirring inside me. Hope. The old barn stood at the edge of the ranch, its weathered planks silvered by moonlight. My heart pounded as I approached, the night air thick with the scent of sagebrush and anticipation. Caleb's cryptic invitation had haunted me all day, his words looping in my mind. "I've been where you are." Running. Hiding. I pushed open the creaking door, the hinges groaning like a warning. Inside, the barn was a cathedral of shadows, lit only by a single lantern hanging from a beam. Caleb stood in the center, his Stetson pushed back, his face half illuminated. He looked different, less like the unyielding foreman and more like a man carrying a secret too heavy to hold alone. "You came," he said, his voice low but warm, like he hadn't been sure I would. "You didn't give me much choice," I replied, trying to keep my tone light despite the knot in my stomach. "What's this about?" He gestured to a wooden crate in the corner, covered with a dusty tarp. "Sit. This might take a while." I hesitated, then perched on the edge of the crate, my hands clasped tightly to stop their trembling. Caleb paced for a moment, like he was wrestling with something inside himself. Finally, he stopped, his eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made my breath hitch. "I grew up on a ranch like this," he began. "Smaller, down in Wyoming. My dad was like most ranchers, hard as nails, didn't tolerate weakness. Or difference." He paused, his jaw tightening. "I was 17 when I told him I was gay. He beat me so bad I couldn't walk for a week. Then he threw me out." The words hit me like a punch. I'd suspected Caleb carried a past, but hearing it laid bare was different. It was raw, jagged, like a wound that hadn't healed. "I'm sorry," I said, the words feeling small against the weight of his story. "Don't be." He waved a hand, but his eyes were distant. "I survived, bounced around, worked odd jobs, ended up here. This ranch, it's been my home for 10 years. But it's also a cage." He looked at me then, really looked at me, like he was seeing past every wall I'd built. "I saw it in you, Jamie. The way you carry yourself, like you're waiting for the world to turn on you. You're running from something too." I wanted to deny it, to laugh it off, but the truth was a stone in my throat. "My family," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "They didn't take it well when I came out. My dad said I was no son of his. My mom just cried. I left before it got worse." Caleb nodded, like he'd expected as much. "That's why I asked you here. There's something I need you to know, something I've kept hidden for a long time." He reached under the tarp and pulled out a small wooden box, its surface worn smooth by time. He opened it, revealing a stack of letters, their edges yellowed. "These are from someone I loved," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "His name was Eli. He worked here years ago. We were together. In secret, this place, these people, they wouldn't have understood. My heart ached at the pain in his voice. What happened to him? Caleb's eyes darkened. He left. Couldn't handle the hiding anymore. Last I heard, he was in Seattle, trying to start over. But these letters, they're all I have left of him. He handed me one, and I unfolded it carefully, the paper fragile under my fingers. The words were simple but heavy with love, written in a hurried scrawl. Caleb, I dream of a day we don't have to hide. I'll wait for you always. I looked up, my chest tight. Why are you showing me this? Because I see you, Jamie, he said, stepping closer. The air between us felt alive, charged with something I couldn't name. I wanted to reach out, to bridge the distance, but fear held me back. What are you saying? I asked, my voice shaking. I'm saying you don't have to do this alone, he said. But it's dangerous. This ranch, this town, they're not kind to people like us. If you stay, you need to know what you're risking. Before I could respond, a noise outside made us both freeze, a low, guttural sound, like an animal caught in a trap. Caleb's hand shot to the knife at his belt, his body tensing. Stay here, he whispered, moving toward the door. But I couldn't stay put. I followed him, my heart hammering as we stepped into the night. The sound came again, louder, from the direction of the cattle pens. Caleb's flashlight cut through the darkness, revealing a calf tangled in wire, its leg bloodied. Relief washed over me, but Caleb's face remained grim. Help me, he said, kneeling beside the animal. Together, we worked to free it, our hands brushing as we cut the wire. The calf limped away, and for a moment, we were alone again, the night wrapping around us like a secret. You didn't have to follow me, Caleb said, his voice softer now. I wanted to, I admitted, meeting his gaze. In the moonlight, his eyes were a storm of emotions. Fear, longing, resolve. I felt it too, the pull between us, dangerous and undeniable. Go back to the bunkhouse, he said finally, turning away. We'll talk more tomorrow. I nodded, but as I walked back, my mind was spinning. Caleb's story, his letters, his warning, they were a mirror to my own fears. But there was something else, something that made my heart race, the possibility of not being alone anymore. For the first time, I wondered if this ranch could be more than a hiding place. But the weight of Caleb's words lingered. This place, this town, they're not kind to people like us. As I lay in my bunk that night, the darkness felt heavier, laced with both hope and dread. The next morning, the ranch buzzed with its usual rhythm, but I was a mess of nerves. Caleb's words in the barn had cracked something open inside me, exposing a raw hope I hadn't dared to feel since Chicago. Yet his warning echoed louder. They're not kind to people like us. I threw myself into work, hoping manual labor would quiet my thoughts. I was mucking stalls when Maria found me, her sharp eyes catching the tension in my shoulders. You look like you saw a ghost, Jamie, she said, leaning against a post. What's eating you? I forced a smile, shoveling faster. Just tired. Long night. She didn't buy it, but she let it go, handing me a bottle of water. Caleb's been off too, she said casually. Keeps staring at the horizon like it's going to tell him something. You two have a fight or what? Her words hit too close. No fight. I mumbled, but my face burned. Maria raised an eyebrow, then shrugged and walked off, leaving me to wrestle with my thoughts. That afternoon, Caleb assigned me to ride out with him to check the northern fences. The ride was quiet, the only sounds the creak of saddles and the thud of hooves on dry earth. The Montana landscape stretched endlessly before us, vast and unforgiving, a mirror to the turmoil inside me. Caleb rode ahead, his back straight, his silence heavy. I wanted to ask about last night, about Eli, about what he meant by not doing this alone, but the words stuck in my throat. We stopped at a broken fence, dismounting to repair it. As we worked, our hands brushing over wire and tools, the tension between us grew unbearable. Finally, I couldn't hold back. What did you mean last night? I asked, my voice sharper than I intended. About not being alone? Caleb paused, his hands stilling on the fence post. I meant what I said, Jamie. You don't have to hide who you are. Not with me. My heart lurched. And what? We just what? Pretend the rest of the world doesn't exist? You said it yourself. This place isn't safe. He turned to face me, his blue eyes fierce. It's not safe. Never has been. But I've spent 10 years keeping my head down, and I'm tired of it. Seeing you, it's like seeing who I could have been if I'd been braver. His words stole my breath. I wanted to believe him, to lean into the possibility he was offering, but fear clawed at me. What if someone finds out? The other hands, the town. What happens then? Caleb's jaw tightened. I don't have all the answers. But I know I can't keep living like this, and I don't think you can either. Before I could respond, a shout broke the silence. One of the hands, a burly guy named Hank, rode up, his face grim. Caleb, we got trouble. Rustlers hit the east pasture. Took a dozen head. Caleb cursed under his breath, his focus shifting instantly. Jamie, you're with me. Let's go. We rode hard, the urgency drowning out our conversation. The east pasture was a mess. Fences cut, hoofprints scattering into the hills. Caleb's face was stone, but I could see the anger simmering beneath. Rustlers were a rare but serious threat, and losing cattle could cripple the ranch. We tracked the trail for hours, following broken branches and churned earth, but the thieves had vanished into the rugged terrain. By dusk, we were back at the ranch, exhausted and frustrated. Caleb gathered the hands. His voice clipped as he laid out a plan to increase patrols. I watched him, marveling at his command, but my mind was still on our earlier conversation. As the meeting broke up, he pulled me aside. We're not done talking, he said quietly. Meet me at the creek tonight. I nodded, my stomach twisting with nerves and something else, something that felt like longing. That night, under a sky blazing with stars, I found Caleb by the creek, his silhouette softened by the moonlight. He was sitting on a flat rock, his hat beside him, his face unguarded for the first time. I don't know how to do this, he admitted as I sat beside him. I've kept people at arm's length for so long. But you make me want to try. I swallowed hard, my heart racing. I'm scared, Caleb. Of this place, of what happens if we're not careful. But I'm more scared of going back to being alone. He reached for my hand, his touch tentative but warm. Then don't. Stay with me, Jamie. We'll figure it out together. For a moment, the world felt small, just the two of us, the creek's soft murmur, the stars overhead. I squeezed his hand, a silent promise, but the weight of his warning lingered. This ranch, this town, they weren't safe. And as we sat there, hand in hand, I couldn't shake the feeling that we were standing on the edge of something dangerous, something that could either save us or destroy us. The days that followed were a blur of stolen glances and quiet moments. Caleb and I were careful, keeping our connection hidden behind the ranch's relentless demands. But every brush of his hand, every shared look, felt like a rebellion against the world that wanted to keep us apart. The rustlers hadn't struck again, but the tension on the ranch was palpable, like a storm waiting to break. One morning, as I was saddling horses, Maria cornered me. You and Caleb, she said, her voice low but pointed. Something's going on, isn't it? I froze, my heart pounding. What are you talking about? She smirked, but her eyes were kind. I'm not blind, Jamie. I see the way he looks at you. Just be careful. This place has eyes, and not all of them are friendly. Her warning rattled me, but I brushed it off, telling myself we were discreet. Still, I couldn't ignore the growing unease. Hank, the hand who'd reported the rustlers, had started watching me too closely, his comments laced with suspicion. City boys getting cozy with the boss, he'd muttered once, loud enough for me to hear. I ignored it, but the words festered. Caleb and I stole time when we could, late nights by the creek, early mornings in the barn before the others woke. Each moment was a lifeline, but it came with a cost. I saw the strain in Caleb's eyes, the way he carried the weight of our secret. "We need to be smarter," he said one night, his voice tight. "If this gets out before we're ready." He didn't finish, but he didn't need to. I knew the stakes. The ranch was a small world, and the town beyond it was smaller still. Gossip spread like wildfire, and acceptance was a rare commodity. Then, everything changed. It was a crisp morning, the air sharp with the promise of fall, when Hank burst into the bunkhouse, his face red with anger. "Caleb, we got a problem," he shouted, holding up a piece of paper, a flyer, crude and handwritten. "Found this nailed to the gate." I crowded in with the others, my stomach dropping as I read the words. "Faggots ain't welcome on this ranch. Leave or else." The air sucked out of the room. Caleb's face was a mask, but his hands clenched into fists. "Who did this?" he demanded, his voice deadly calm. Hank shrugged, but his eyes flicked to me, sharp and accusing. "Dunno. But folks talk, Caleb. You know how it is." The other hands shifted uncomfortably, their silence louder than words. Maria caught my eye, her expression a mix of pity and fear. I felt exposed, like every secret I'd buried was written on my skin. Caleb crumpled the flyer, his jaw tight. "We've got work to do," he said, dismissing the group. But as the others filed out, he grabbed my arm. "Stay." Once we were alone, he let out a shaky breath. "This is my fault," he said. "I should have known better." "No," I said fiercely. "This isn't on you. It's on them, whoever did this." He shook his head, his eyes haunted. "I've seen this before, Jamie. With Eli. It starts with words, then it gets worse. I can't let that happen to you." My heart twisted. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying we need a plan," he said, his voice low. "If we're going to do this, be together, we can't stay here. Not like this." The words hit me hard. Leave the ranch? It was the only place I'd felt a flicker of belonging since Chicago. But Caleb was right. This place wasn't safe, not for us. "Where would we go?" I asked, my voice barely steady. "I don't know yet," he admitted. "But I've got some money saved. We could start over, somewhere new. Somewhere we don't have to hide." The idea was terrifying, but it sparked something in me. Hope, fragile but real. "Okay," I said finally. "But we need to be careful. Whoever left that flyer, they're watching." That night, we met at the old barn, our sanctuary. Caleb pulled me into his arms, his embrace fierce and desperate. "I'm not letting you go," he whispered against my hair. "No matter what." I clung to him, my fear melting into something warmer, something worth fighting for. But as we stood there, wrapped in each other, a shadow moved outside, a figure, too quick to identify, slipping into the darkness. My blood ran cold. Someone new, and they weren't done with us yet. The next week was a tightrope walk. Caleb and I kept our distance during the day, our every move calculated to avoid suspicion. But the flyer had changed everything. The ranch felt like a pressure cooker, every glance from the other hands loaded with judgment. Hank's hostility grew bolder, his comments cutting deeper. "You two sure spend a lot of time together," he sneered one day, spitting tobacco into the dirt. I ignored him, but the threat in his eyes was unmistakable. Maria became our ally, slipping us warnings about whispers among the hands. "Hank's been talking to some folks in town," she told me one evening, her voice low. "They're not happy about outsiders like you. Watch your back." Caleb and I started planning in secret, mapping out a future beyond the ranch. He talked about a small town in Oregon, a place he'd heard was more accepting, where we could build a life without looking over our shoulders. The idea felt like a lifeline, but leaving wasn't simple. We needed money, a plan, a way to slip away without drawing attention. Then, one night, everything unraveled. I was in the bunkhouse, packing a small bag in case we needed to leave fast, when the door slammed open. Hank stood there, flanked by two men I recognized from town, hard-faced, with eyes that gleamed with malice. "Time's up, city boy," Hank growled, stepping inside. "We know what you and Caleb are." My heart stopped. I backed up, my hands raised. I don't know what you're talking about. Don't play dumb. One of the townies snapped, cracking his knuckles. We saw you two at the barn. Disgusting. Fear surged through me, but anger burned hotter. Get out, I said, my voice shaking but firm. This isn't your business. Hank laughed, a cruel sound. It's everybody's business when you're corrupting a good ranch. Caleb's been trouble for years, but you're the last straw. Before I could respond, a shout came from outside. Caleb burst in, his face a storm of fury. Get away from him, he roared, his knife already in hand. The air crackled with tension, the four of us locked in a standoff. Hank smirked, unafraid. You gonna fight us all, Dawson? For him. Caleb didn't flinch. If I have to. For a moment, I thought it would come to blows. But then Maria appeared, a shotgun cradled in her arms. Enough, she said, her voice steel. You three, get off this ranch. Now. The townies hesitated, but Maria's finger twitched on the trigger, and they backed down, muttering curses as they left. Hank lingered, his eyes promising retribution. This ain't over, he said, then followed the others into the night. Caleb turned to me, his hands shaking as he pulled me into a fierce embrace. You okay? He whispered. I nodded, my throat tight. Thanks to you. And Maria. She lowered the shotgun, her face grim. You two need to go? Tonight. Hank won't stop, and he's got friends. Caleb nodded, his jaw set. We're ready. We didn't have much, just the clothes on our backs, the money Caleb had saved, and the hope that had carried us this far. Maria drove us to the bus station in town, her silence heavy with worry. Be safe, she said as we climbed out, her eyes shining with unshed tears. And don't come back. The bus ride was long, the darkness outside a blur of possibility and fear. Caleb held my hand, his grip steady despite the uncertainty ahead. We'll make it, he said, his voice quiet but sure. Together. When we arrived in Oregon, the small town was everything Caleb had promised, quiet, green, and open in a way the ranch never could be. We found a cheap apartment, took odd jobs, and started building a life. It wasn't easy, money was tight, and the ghosts of our pasts lingered. But every morning, waking up beside Caleb, I felt something I hadn't in years, home. Months later, we got a letter from Maria. Hank had been fired, the ranch sold to new owners who didn't care about old grudges. She'd included a photo of the creek, the place where Caleb and I had first dared to hope. On the back, she'd written, You did the right thing. Live free. I looked at Caleb, his face softened by the morning light, and knew she was right. We'd faced fear, hatred, and the weight of a world that wasn't ready for us. But we'd chosen each other, and that choice, fragile, fierce, and ours, was worth every risk. As I leaned against him, the future stretched out like the Montana sky, vast and full of promise.